We're live, and hopefully I don't get cut off again like I did. Excuse me, just got back from a run. Hopefully I don't get it cut off again like I did last night. We're having trouble with our internet connection again, unfortunately. Hopefully you guys are all doing well. Tonight we're talking about some cool stuff. I got a video up today. Hopefully you guys have seen it. And we're talking about whether or not you need to modify your motor on your turbo combination. And the answer is yes and no, as always. And honestly, I did the test, or I showed the results of the test in the video on an LS application, and it applies to everything, especially if you're going to the wrecking yard. I mean, not all of us go get LS motors, and people already have other motors too. So if you have a 5-liter Mustang, for instance, you have a Vortex small block Chevy, you have a Gen 5 or 6 big block Chevy, a Coyote, a Hemi, whatever it is, whatever you're starting with, some of those things will want different things, but for the most part, like if we we'll start off with the LS. If you go to the wrecking yard and get an LS, really the go-to platform for that, the modifications that you make are a cam and springs and boost. Some guys don't even do the cam. Some guys just run boost on the stock cam, and that works well too. I like putting the camshaft in it because almost any camshaft that you put in, especially on a 4.8 or a 5.3, because it has the mildest of all of the factory LS cams, you're going to get such a big jump in power. I mean, you can get, it's not unusual if you put a good size cam in it, you know, one of the biggest ones will fit the available piston to valve clearance. You could get 100 horsepower just from the cam swap. And then when you add boost to that and you add 14.7 pounds, all of a sudden that 100 horsepower can turn into 200 horsepower. That's why I like putting cams in there. And I don't recommend you going all in on the camshaft. And we'll talk about that, why that's not necessary. And it's not necessary for the same reason. And it's interesting that that little tangent that we'll go off on the camshaft is what I get more comments on than anything else. Most people tend to overcam, especially when I tell them that every camshaft is a turbo cam. And then they go, well, you know, what about something with a 106 LSA or something that has 700 lift or something that has like way more duration? And in the case of their NA power output, they were trying to make lots of NA power. And that's how you do it with a big camshaft. You do it with a big camshaft, you do it with big cylinder heads, and lots of intake flow, lots of RPM, and all that works. Then when you add boost to that, they're going, okay, well, I'm making, you know, 550 or 600 horsepower NA now, and I want to make like 800 or 900 or 1,000. The thing that it's hard to get them to understand is that to make the 1,000 horsepower, they no longer need the 600 horsepower camshaft. They can use something a lot smaller and still get to that 1,000 horsepower. We'll get to that camshaft part of it in a second, because the camshaft was actually the last of the 3 modifications that I mentioned when I was doing the video. So the first one was intake manifold, and the example that I used was going from a stock LS1 intake manifold, which is the worst of all of the factory intake manifolds. So it'd be like on a 5-liter Mustang, it'd be like using the HO manifold and going up to anything else. Or on a big block Chevy, using maybe a throttle body manifold and the throttle body injection, and then going to anything else. You know, same thing on a small block Chevy, you know, the Vortex stuff. But do you really need to do that intake manifold upgrade? And we know from experience and from testing that the excuse me, that the fast manifold can be worth a lot of power. And in the example that I used, it was worth 56 horsepower just from the intake swap. So that's a lot of power. But the thing is, you don't really need it. The intake manifold and the accoutrement, the the billet rails and the throttle body and all that, so we're going to probably put you in at over 1,000 horsepower. Now, that's probably as much as you'd spend on all the other stuff to make your turbo motor, maybe. Maybe a little more than that, but it puts it into perspective. You're spending at least 50% more and probably close to 60 or 70% more on just the intake manifold. And again, it's worth 50 horsepower. But in the video that I did, I showed you that, okay, it was worth 50 horsepower, but it was only worth 50 or 56 horsepower, but it was only worth that under these specific set of circumstances. One, we use the LS1 intake manifold, which almost nobody uses. If you go to the wrecking yard, you're not going to get an LS1 manifold. You're not going to find an LS1. You never find those anymore. They use them in so few cars. You're going to go there and get a truck one. So you're either going to get the early truck, which is a lot better than an LS1, or you're going to get a late truck, which is even better than the LS1, even better than the original truck. So you go to Trailblazer style. So both of those work really well. So you're already up from what the bad manifold was, the LS1 manifold. And then you have a 5.3. You don't have a fully built 6-liter with really good ported heads, lots of camshaft, lots of compression. And again, it's a 6-liter, not a 5.3 or a 4.8. So you'll never get the 56 horsepower gain from the fast to the LS1 that we saw in that example. You might only get on a 5.3 with a cam in it, you might only get 15 or 18 or something. So the manifold upgrade is not really a viable deal. It's not really a cost-effective thing. Putting a Trailblazer SS, yeah, if you can get that and it's, it's a couple $100 or whatever instead of the truck one, that might be a good upgrade. But even at that, you don't need that either. The truck manifold, the early truck manifold, comes with all of these things, all of these LM7s, LR4s and stuff that we find at the wrecking yard. It's going to work just fine because that manifold, and we'll get into the cylinder heads in a minute, but that manifold would allow you to make 700 plus horsepower with the GT45 and 1,000 horsepower with the VS Racing 7875 Gen 2 turbo or an S475 or an S480. It would allow you to make everything that you need to make out of that turbo. So there's no reason to go to another manifold. Just like I said in the video, if you just turn the boost up a couple of pounds, you've made up for what it would do. And honestly, in the case of an intake manifold, you really probably only have to turn it up 1 pound, and then you'll get everything back that was missing. And that's a lot less expensive. Turning your boost gauge up or turning your boost controller up and adding a pound of boost is a lot easier and less expensive than trying to buy another manifold and making all that stuff fit, especially if you do the manifolds. Even if you do a Trailblazer SS, you have to get a bigger throttle body. If you do a fast, you definitely have to get a bigger throttle body. You don't need a bigger throttle body with a truck manifold. The factory size throttle body will work just fine if you get an early manual one. I like those. You can do it with a drive-by-wire if you're using a factory ECU. But even if you just use a manual one, that's the nice thing about the turbo is you don't have to worry about throttle body size. You can get that 1,000 horsepower with the stock throttle body and with the stock truck manifold. Cylinder heads are the same thing, especially on the LS, and we'll talk about other ones in a minute. But on the LS, lucky for us that if you go to the wrecking yard and get a 4.8 or a 5.3 or a 6.0 also, and you get that, you have cylinder heads that will already support that power under boost. Because as we know, when you build the motor, the turbo is just going to multiply whatever's there. And as luck would have it, a 706 head, an 862 head, a 241 head, a 317, a 243, 799, any of those cathedral port heads will support more power than you're going to be making when you put a cam in these motors. So if you put a cam in a 5.3 and you're making 400 plus horsepower, which is fairly easy to do, it's not very much boost to get you to a 4-digit power level with the turbo. The turbos will support that. They're going to be effective there. So again, a ported head, as we saw, a ported head on the right combination can be 55, 60 or more horsepower, and that's good. And if you're trying to make 1 million horsepower, a ported head is a really good way to go. But again, like the intake, you don't have to have it not for a 700 horsepower turbo and not for a 1,000 horsepower turbo, because you can already do that with the cylinder heads that you have. Same thing with a big block Chevy. If you go get a Gen 6 big block Chevy and you just put a cam and the right springs in it, the stock heads will flow enough to make 400 and maybe as much as 500 horsepower, but you probably can't put enough camshaft in it because you don't have enough piston to valve clearance in the case of that big block Chevy. But you certainly could get probably between 425 and 450, which again is enough with boost to get you into 4-digit power levels, even with a single S480 or a T6 S475 on a big block. So you have enough to do that. Though, Carrie, thank you very much for a 6-pack of coffee. Thank you very much. But while those don't need cylinder heads, one thing that I would recommend a cylinder head upgrade is on a 5-liter Mustang. If you have a 5-liter 302 and you have the HO intake, I wouldn't recommend running boost on that. You can, but it just runs, it's like a tune port Chevy. It runs such low RPM that the runner length is designed to make power at such a low RPM that you're not going to make a lot of horsepower. You're going to make 1 million foot-pounds of torque, and if that's what you want, you just want to spin the tires and go to Cars and Coffee or whatever, then that will work. But any kind of other intake manifold, and what I would do if it were me and I was building a 5-liter right now, I would just go get the Explorer stuff. I would definitely get the heads, because the other thing is the intake is substandard on the 5-liter, and also the heads are just terrible. So if you, and the GT40 head is not a huge step up, like it's not a set of trick flows or airflow researches or darts or Edelbrocks or any of the other good heads, but it is better than a factory head. So if you put a set of GT40s on, put the Cobra intake manifold on, you're going to get a big jump in power, and especially after you cam it, which we would recommend the cam. So on the 5-liter Mustang, it's kind of getting everything, but as luck would have it, all of that stuff comes from the wrecking yard. So it's cheap. And if you went to get a motor from the wrecking yard, you just assemble all that anyway, or just get a whole Explorer motor and then put springs and cams in the Explorer motor, since it already has all that stuff. So that's another example. If I was doing a Coyote, I might not do cams in it. I might run the factory cams, because that motor already makes a ton of power. Just put ring gap in it and head studs and stuff, and then put a turbo on it, and you can make a ton of power, because that thing already makes a lot of power. Same thing with you can make a ton of power with the 6.4 Hemi. Even the 5.7 makes a lot. I would put a cam in the 5.7 Hemi, even a late model one with the dual runner intake. You do a cam upgrade, and that thing's going to make well over 500 horsepower. And then again, very easy to get to huge, serious power levels with a motor that's already sporting power like that. And we see the same thing now when I go back and see Brian Tooley, like the L83 5.3 liter direct injected motors, the LT motors. That thing can make over 500 horsepower with a very mild camshaft in it. And so because it can do that, that's going to mean that we don't have to add a lot of boost to stuff like that. So that's what this video is about. So the ported heads, there are some examples where I would do a head upgrade, and then most of them I would not, because it's very easy to get to that power level. Camshafts are another thing. One of the, or a few of the examples that I use in the video is that if you, like on the LS3 that I use, we picked up 70 or more horsepower by doing a camshaft, and we put a camshaft in it that was getting on the edge of available piston to valve clearance, because that's what you need to do. And we went from 495 horsepower up to 565 or 70 horsepower. So those are pretty good gains. You can get even more of a gain on the cathedral port stuff, not because of the cylinder heads or anything like that, only because they use such a milder camshaft. An LS3 cam is already a pretty good upgrade from an LM7 cam. The factory 5.3 and LR4, which they share the same camshaft, is the mildest cam that they offer. And it's very, very tame and doesn't make very much power. So the upshot of that is when you do a cam upgrade, go from an LM7 to anything else, you get really big gains. And we've done stuff where you get 100 horsepower from going with just a cam and spring upgrade on those. And one of the instances one of the examples that I use is I picked up 175 horsepower from a cam swap. But you had to do something very specific to get that kind of gain. We had to start with the smallest cam, which was an LM7 cam, and we put a very big camshaft in it, and the motor that we put it in was also a 408-inch stroker that already had compression and good heads and a good intake manifold. And so all that was missing was this big camshaft. And actually, we did that test in reverse. We just had run it with that cam and made big power. We're like, okay, how much would we now detune it if we just put a stock LM7 cam in? And as it turned out, we detuned it by 175 horsepower. So it was quite a bit. And that's one of those, big clickbait kind of things. It really did it, but you have to be specific. It'd be like me putting a stock camshaft in a top fuel motor. Hey, look, I cut out, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 horsepower or whatever it would do. Probably more than that. It probably would be ridiculous. But that gives you an idea. And the thing is with the camshafts and the turbo motors is I recommend them. Like for an LS, that's definitely a go-to. For almost all of those, like I said, except for possibly the Coyote, I might not do cams in that. But a Hemi is definitely going to respond. The LS stuff is going to respond. The LT stuff is going to respond. Big blocks, definitely. Small blocks, small block forwards, big block forwards. All of the Dodges, a 318, 360, as we saw on the Magnum stuff. The earlier 360s, the LA stuff. Almost all of those are going to respond to camshaft. The problem is a lot of those earlier motors don't have the benefit of really good cylinder heads. So when you do a camshaft on them, they don't respond nearly as much as some of these other examples that have lots of cylinder head, because that's what's kind of holding them back. You put cam in and then they go, okay, now I'm kind of struggling on my airflow a little bit, and then we cure the airflow, and then okay, now the cam's a little bit too mild, and you start balancing all of that stuff. But camshafts are definitely one of the things I would recommend for the turbo stuff. But again, lots of guys have put boost on stock cams, but they're usually doing it for a different reason. They're not very many people that I've heard from are trying to make like maximum power with a stock cam. I don't know why you'd put yourself through that kind of aggravation. Most of the people do it because they just want to get like 50% more torque, let's say, and they have the stock cam. It idles like a stock cam, it drives like a stock cam, it gets good fuel mileage, and then when they're under boost, they just want something that has more power. I would have loved that in my Civic VX. Driving around getting 55 miles per gallon on the freeway is awesome. But it would have been nice that instead of the 93 horsepower that it made under VTEC, that if it would have made 150 horsepower, then it just would have been a lot funner. So if I could have run 7 pounds of boost, just use the boost during acceleration and have this thing still cruise and do all the things that it did with that stock dual cam profile. It's actually a single cam profile, but in that particular instance, all it did was open up the other 2 valves because it was a emissions or a economy VTEC deal. But the right camshaft is very important for these applications, and that's why I suggest almost anything. And once you decide, okay, I'm going to put a cam in with the LS stuff or big blocks, one of the things I alluded to earlier, is the fact that guys tend to want to over cam these things. So I get comments and emails and messages from guys like, oh yeah, I've got this 236 at 50 camshaft in my 5.3, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of camshaft. And if you're trying to make, big power at 7,500 or whatever, and you're using that kind of camshaft, then, more power to you. And that camshaft will run under boost. It's just that, again, if you're trying to get to 1,000 horsepower, you don't need a 236 cam in a 5.3. You don't even need one in a 6.0. You don't even need one in a 408. You can use a lot less camshaft, and that's what I try to explain to them. Hey, look, wouldn't you rather have a motor that drives around nice and has good response and even gets decent fuel mileage while you're cruising and stuff, but still makes 1,000 horsepower? And that's what you would get if you put the right cam in, and not necessarily a turbo cam, just a smaller cam. You could pick whatever one you want, a smaller NA cam, a smaller truck cam, a smaller, turbo cam, whatever, blower cam, whatever it is you want. You could make a lot of power with those, and the thing would drive around a lot better than it does with your big cam. But your big cam, you can put boost on. It's just going to be cantankerous in the way that it was NA. Now it's just going to be making a lot more power. But that's the good thing about that I like about turbo stuff, is that you can get away with such mild cam timing and have such huge power levels. So you get the drivability and all the things that you want. And then you can decide, okay, just, okay, 7 pounds is nice to drive around on 10 or 20 or whatever your number is. And that's the thing. You can dial it into your own personality and your own desire. And the cool thing about turbo stuff is that you're driving it around on 7 pounds or 10 pounds on the street or whatever. And then when you go to the track, you can put good fuel in it, turn the timing up, turn the boost up, whatever you're going to do, and then go off and make some, crazy numbers, and then turn the boost back down and then just drive it around, and it all works good. And you don't need really big cams for that. And as I showed in the video, you also don't need, in most cases, some sort of fancy, expensive intake manifold. You don't need fancy ported heads. The one time, or the area where you would need that stuff, and they always are beneficial. And I don't want to downgrade like ported heads and intake manifolds and stuff, because they all work. And the thing that's nice about them is if you do put them on, like if you put a set of ported 243, like we use a set of total engine airflow ported heads and a fast manifold on there and the right camshaft, all of a sudden your 5.3 is going to be getting up closer to making 500 horsepower NA. So it's going to take a lot less boost to make that power. And that's good, because the lower the boost, the lower the charge temperature, the less chance of detonation. All of that stuff works out really well. Again, it's just that you could top the turbo out. You're just going to do it at a lower boost level. The one area I can say where all of that stuff comes in handy, obviously, is when you have lots of turbo. So instead of 1,000 horsepower turbo, if you have 2 of them, like we did on the Big Bang motor, then you need a powerful NA motor. And that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to make, out of the 6-liter with heads, cam, and intake, you're trying to make 500 horsepower, 550 horsepower, getting up near 600 horsepower NA. Then you see really big numbers, at fairly low boost levels, which I like. I like making a lot of power at low boost, but you can also do that with more boost. And obviously, when you're doing that with more boost, other things become critical. Your tune becomes ultra critical the higher the temperature is, and also your octane becomes critical. Things like intercooling become very, very important. All of that stuff becomes much more critical, and that's why I like doing it on low boost stuff. And that's especially the case, not so much with the turbos, because the turbos are kind of, since they're regulated by boost, they'll just spin faster to make whatever boost that you need them to make. But if you're running a centrifugal blower, for example, or a roots blower, it's a good idea to make the NA motor more efficient and more powerful. That way, the boost comes down on those blowers relative to their blower speed. And then, especially on roots style superchargers, the lower the boost, the lower the charge temperature, the more efficient they're going to be. Everything is going to be better on a blown application. So I like to put, like when I was running my 5-liter stuff with the Vortec on it, you know, we put good heads on it. We put a good intake manifold on it. We put a camshaft in it, and then ran the Vortec on it so that we could make good power and do it at a low boost. It was even more important on that application because we had no intercooler on it. And thinking back now, we tried one, but we dropped so much boost with the intercooler that it just didn't work out very well. So I just got rid of the intercooler idea. Later on, they introduced that aftercooler deal, but even that is kind of, that core size that they used was kind of limiting as we did testing on it. I did testing on it with a 351, and it's just limited in its flow capability. On my little 302, it probably would have been fine at the power level that I was running at, because I was only making like, I don't know, 430 to 450 at the tire, the way that I ran around most of the time. So that intercooler probably would have been okay, and it would have been beneficial. But having an intercooler would have been a good idea, especially because I was running sustained stuff at the Silver State. So it would have been much better. But that's the other reason that we kept the boost down low while still making the power to keep the charge temperature down, because we didn't have an intercooler. And I was never running E85 or anything, you know, back in the day, because I don't even think it was invented yet. That's how far back it was. So right now I'm working on another video on showing what happens when we max out the flow rate of a turbo, how we diagnose that, and what happens to various things when we do that. So that'll be another good test, and that video should come out tomorrow. So let's, oh my. Am I back? Please do another cold air into a turbo versus hot air into a turbo. A bunch of the turbo Mopar guys swear it makes no difference, even though Gus Mahone proved it years ago. That's just silly that they wouldn't want cold air going into the turbo, because the temperature of the turbo, temperature of the air going out of the turbo is in direct relation to the air going into the turbo. Compression ratio versus boost, that's going to be mostly octane dependent. Lots of racers are running a real high static compression and real high boost, but you have to have real high octane to be able to do that. Pay your internet bill. Yep, that's good. Honda VTEX, I wouldn't call it a stock cam. It is a stock cam. It's stock in that motor. That's what makes them so awesome. Starting with a 6-liter would definitely start you out making more power than it does on a 5.3. And it will also spool the turbo so you could use a bigger turbo. My machine shop will have my LS2 block and 243 heads with upgrades Saturday. Nice. Yeah, 9-to-1 is a good static compression. I mean, obviously we have lots of stuff that we run boost on, factory stuff that's 10-to-1 or even more than that, and it works. But, and I think, and I'm not 100% certain about this, but I feel better that the higher the compression, the more that I want to put ring gap in it. Will my 75-76 precision see too much back pressure going from my 4.8 to a Trek Norris Cam 5.3? No, that will be fine. 70 Mopar. There's no way for me to tell you what the highest static compression, because the static compression is only one of the things that's going to determine the detonation threshold of that combination. The inlet air temp, the chamber design, there's going to be a lot of things that the coolant temp, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to ultimately affect what happens there. Yes, underhood air, yeah, going into the turbo definitely causes them. I went through that with the guys, with the young guys out racing turbo Hondas and stuff when I had my Dynojet out in Vegas. Is, you know, it's not unusual for it to be 110, 115 degrees out there. And these guys had open filters or just open turbos with no filters on them, drawing air from right behind their radiator. It's already 115 degrees out. And then then the air going through the radiator is coming out at 200. And so the air going into their turbo is 200 degrees. So how hot do you think it is going out of the turbo? Even though they have an intercooler, which would definitely helps. But life is much better. Just ask them to drive their car at night, like on a cold night when it's like 40 degrees, and watch them have to retune their combination. Building a 5.7 Hemi stroker, what torque converter and cam combo in a Magnum? Is it a daily driver? I have some Hemi cam tests up on the channel. You can kind of see what those things did. Yeah, DFA, the Ford head's exhaust side is going to be problematic. Suggest a cam profile for a 7.4 big block that doesn't require a valve spring change. Then just leave a stock one in there then. Yeah, porting iron heads is not good. Does anybody know if a 6L80 transmission works with a boosted 6-liter? Julius, did you ever run the Sullivan intake higher than 6,500 on the 544 valve? I don't think we did. How high are you going to run that, Julius? I think that your Boss intake is better than the Sullivan intake in up to 7,000. Yeah, pulling Vegas air is really good if you want good fuel mileage. 9-to-1, 331, AFR 185. Will it survive 10 pounds? Yes, it will. And hopefully it's intercooled. Twin turbo subs are all laggy down low. That's not accurate. You can size turbos to come on at 1800 RPM if you want. If I run two 7875s on my 6-liter, what AR would be better? I found some with 68 and some with 96. You're running twin 7875s? Do you want them to be responsive, or are you trying to make like 1500 horsepower? Yeah, James, it makes a big difference in not drawing hot air in there. So if you're running to 7800, then you're going to want something short. Porting and polishing your heads does nothing to your compression unless you're polishing or changing the chamber size. I would love to know more about things you learned running Silver State along the longevity of parts. I can tell you that you worry the whole time. You take off from the starting line, and it depends. A lot of guys are running in speed classes. So if you're running in a 100-mile-an-hour class, or 110 or 20 or 30 or even 140-mile-an-hour class, and you're running in a new Corvette, that's part throttle. It will do that all day long. You could have the air on and all that stuff. We were running full throttle, trying to go as fast as we could. And I can tell you that when you take off, you go through all the gears and your heart's pounding, and you have about 5,000 pounds of pressure on your leg trying to hold the throttle down, because, you know, 3 or 4 pounds would do it, but you need to stand on it with both feet. And after a while, your leg starts quivering. You realize, hey, I don't need to be trying to push the throttle all the way through the floor. And then after a while, after the adrenaline starts coming down and you're driving and you've got a few miles, you start thinking, then you start hearing noises. What's that droning noise? Did I torque all the lug nuts? I wonder if the drive shaft is okay. And then you start thinking about all that stuff. And then for me, I watch the gauges. So I watch the water temp, watch the oil temp, if you have that, oil pressure, all of that stuff. Boost gauge stays fairly consistent to when we were running it. The interesting thing is when I ran the thing NA, it would go, when it was near stock, it would run almost the same speed in 4th gear as it would in 5th gear. It just do it at a much lower engine speed. It would go all the way to 6,000, which is way past the power peak on that 5-liter motor, because it still had the stock intake and all that stuff on it. It just had headers on it. So it would run to 6,000. That car would run 100 and it went 146 miles an hour with headers on it, and the car was lowered. But it would do the same speed in 4th gear as it would in 5th. It would just do it at about 2,000 less RPM in 5th gear. And when you were running it in 4th, which we would drop a gear down if we got on a little bit of hill or anything, you could watch the water temperature go up, because you could see that the water pump was actually cavitating. And so it was not working very well. And when the motor was running at 4,000 RPM or 41 or 4,200 RPM instead of 6,000 RPM, it was much happier. The water temperature would just stabilize and just be happy and run like that seemingly forever until you ran out of gas. So it's a lot of cool stuff. You want to run in the 170 class, that would be fast. Wheelbase media. I have a 4.8 with the BTR stage 1 truck cam and stock 862 heads. Twin via 6762s. Why do you have twins on it? I think 167 would be enough for a 4.8. Let's hear your life story. Yeah, I did American Ninja Warrior. That was a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of good Silver State stories. Yeah, there's a lot of time, because it's a, you know, when have you ever run a half hour or 40 minutes at wide open throttle? It's a lot of time to contemplate, to think about stuff, sort stuff out. Yeah, the 0.68 was pretty tall in fifth gear. And then I tried a bunch of different gears. Like we ended up running 241 gears in 4th gear. I tried 327s and 373s and 355s and just 273s and all kinds of different things for the Silver State, doing calculations on it to figure out what would work once we put more power in it. It was a lot happier once we put the Vortec on it. Then it would use that 0.68 5th gear, and you could run, over 5,000 RPM, and it would get pretty sporty. With the R trim in it and 10 pounds, it went 196 miles an hour. Yeah, with your 6-liter, ring gap in the 27 to 30 range is good. I run an FE that makes 550 horsepower NA, so 10 pounds will make 800. Yeah, that seems reasonable. Does a larger turbo make more power per pound of boost? Only if it can. Usually only if the bigger turbo is needed to support the power output that you're trying to support at the boost you're trying to support it at. So if you're trying to run 1,000 horsepower and the 66 millimeter won't support 1,000 horsepower, then yes, the bigger turbo is definitely going to make more power per pound of boost. But if you're running both of those at 500 horsepower and you're running both at 6 pounds of boost, the bigger one's not going to make any more power. What would be the safest power adder for a daily driver? You could run nitrous on it. I ran, I don't know, 20 or 30 bottles on my 5-liter Mustang, and it was really safe, and because you're not using it all the time. I haven't ever done any methanol tests other than we've done water methanol injection, but not methanol just as the fuel. Do you know what the fastest front wheel drive in Silver State is? No, I don't. We went 146 or 7 with a Contour. But I can't, I'm sure that there's been faster cars than that. My wife had a mid-70s comment with an inline 6 I ran flat out for hours on the interstate. So yeah, you had to be at full throttle to go like freeway speed. Yeah, the TPS, when I came back with the data logging to the guys at Kenny Bell, they set up their data logging setup, and I came back and they said something's wrong with the data logging, or something's wrong with your TPS, because it was showing 100% TPS for 32 minutes. I said, yeah. I said, look, here's where we went through some of the turns called the narrows. It's not at 100%. And then right after we went through the narrows, look, it's at 100% again, because I was like, I'm flat there. 5.3 stock crank aftermarket rods and pistons. Can I balance just pistons and rods, or pistons? You have to the pistons and rods and cranks all have to be balanced together, unless you can match balance the other things, which I would find pretty odd for aftermarket stuff. I do want to put together an FE. I haven't ever built one, and I want to just do a 390. I just haven't been able to find one in the wrecking yard. I know. How can 100 people not like it? I'm a joy to be around. I don't know why they just don't love it. Twin 6762s were on the shelf. Hey, that's what you have, man. Make it work. Crossflow. Wait, why did I? Crossflow versus non-crossflow engines. Does being a crossflow allow for more head flow if everything else is identical? Valves can. Think of a 240 crossflow. The crossflow should allow you more potential to make the port bigger, just because of packaging. They don't always do that. That's not a guarantee. Ooh, a 427 with a 428 crank. I thought that was a 454. I guess it depends on the bore size, but I remember the Cobra guys doing a lot of that back in the day. Thank you, Michael. You can get new cranks. Yeah, this was back in the day when they didn't make anything. UPS mech. What we did with the Engine Master stuff that I did is and I try to do this on turbo motors, is if they do have valve reliefs, I'll take sandpaper, or sometimes if I have good Scotch-Brite stuff, and we'll knock down all of those. Sometimes I just do it with a cartridge roll, and we'll knock down all of those edges and sand them. It just makes me feel better. Maybe it's not going to be the propagation point for a hot spot and detonation, but we know that if we knock it down, it never will be. It can't be. And I like doing that. Because you run low boost on a Gen 453 with a DOD cam, or just delete it and swap the cam. I think you could with the DOD cam. We ran DOD lifters in the Hemi, and I ran boost on those, so I would think that wouldn't be a problem. Now, we didn't have it activated, obviously. We were just running it with those lifters, but it still worked. So I don't think that would be a problem. Brian Tooley Racing has a DOD delete cam that's the same specs as that cam. So you can do that and just put standard lifters in it if you're concerned about it. LS3 with ported 243s on 88 millimeter. Yes, you can do that. Would a small block 400 be worth getting out of the junkyard? I don't know where you're going to find those. Those are really hard to find. Yeah, I've seen 360s and 352s in the wrecking yard, but no 390s. Yeah, Dan, that's what I was thinking. It was a 30 over deal. The crossflow head also is better for separating the intake and the exhaust, so that you don't get exhaust heat heating up the charge air going into the intake manifold. Have you played with the Holden 304, 308? I have not. We don't see many of those here. The nice thing about somebody was asking about the 400, if you want to put boost to it, just get if you want a small block Chevy, you don't need a 400. Just get a Vortec 350. It already has good heads on it. You put springs in, you put a cam in it, and then you can run the boost till whatever power output you want. Why don't IHI spinny fans? Where are we going to find those at? Those are only going to be in the commercial trucks, though, right? How much horsepower will my LS make with 20 pounds of boost and DOD activated? If the DOD does the DOD, it's not going to just take them from one side. If you could just have it take it from one side and just put a turbo on one side, then that would be awesome. Uh-oh, I think Tom's been hitting the sauce again. Oh, I love that. And Bob's your uncle. That's just perfect. 265, 302, 305, 307, and 267. You forgot about that. And what's the 265 is a 4.3 liter, right? Vortec heads on a small block 400 compression ratio. It depends on the piston. I built a Vortec 350 with a GT40. Heading to the yard to pick up an 05 or 06 4200. Let the games begin. Get an 06 then. Can you do a turbo Ford 460? And I don't see those very often though. And I have so much to do right now. I want to run another big block Ford, but the next one I run is going to be that 420-29 that Mark has. Turbo heritage from peasant to royalty. I've run precisions versus less expensive stuff. Uh, 262 is 4.3. They also made a 4.3 liter V8. As a matter of fact, they made two of them. Did the Maserati bi-turbo use IHH? But if they did, they were really small ones though, right? My TC has an RB5 and an even cooler. Can the V6 Lfx be swapped with a 6 liter? Yeah, you can put a 6 liter in anything. I don't know about the Trans surviving a 6 liter. There was a 260 small block Ford, but I don't think there was a 260 small block Chevy. Yeah, the 4.3 liter Gen 2 was a 265. Is it worth rebuilding Chinese turbos? Unless you can get the stuff really, really cheap. I haven't seen parts available really cheap. You could just buy a new one. Garrett will outperform a Borg Warner. The Garrett stuff is really nice. There's no doubt about it. I've never used a Molly turbo. A 221, yeah, before they came out with a 260. You're gonna need to run compound turbos for your 1,000 horsepower 2.2. Well, let's work on making half of that first, and then we'll see. We'll see how the rest of it goes. Maybe if I just build 2 motors, it would be easier. A GT40 makes more power than a hypo head does. It flows more. I have a turbo Ford 460. Well, let us know what happened. The turbo 460 does the same thing as every other turbo motor, big block or small block, whatever it is. So whatever you do to your NA motor, if you make 400 horsepower or 500 horsepower, 600 horsepower, whatever you want to build your 460 up to. And luckily, there are lots of good cylinder heads for those and camshafts and all that stuff. You can make lots of power. There's lots of good aluminum heads for them. So you can make, and lots of good stroker stuff. That's why I really like the 460 for that, because you can make 557s out of them, which you can't do with a big block Chevy. So one up for the 460 Ford, because you can make lots of displacement out of it. And there's lots of good stuff available for them now. So whatever you make NA, you just double it at 14.7 pounds, and it makes lots of power. San Diego, I have Ford 5.4 supercharged, ported heads, Super Pro Stage 2 Manly H-beams. Oh, wait, I didn't finish reading that. Can I put turbos? You can put a turbo on your supercharged 5.4. Not a problem. And the turbo size that you put on there, or twins that you put on there, are going to depend on how much power you'd like to make. I mean, didn't the Maserati biturbo only make about 250 horsepower, and it used 2 turbos to do that? So those have to be really, really small. I don't know if the block will do that, Dan. I have no idea. Yeah, 289 hypo head is like every other head, it just like every other 289 head. A stock head, it's not good. It's going to be like an E7 TE head. Been wanting to build a compound turbo 2.2 for about a decade now. It's certainly possible, but the thing is, I've never seen anybody max out just what a single turbo would do on a 2.2, because there's enough motor there to make lots of power with lots and lots of boost. So you don't really need to compound it, I don't think. .64 valve with 99 Cobra intake, twin 60mm turbos. That'll be good. That'll be like the one that I did that I have the video up on. I think we use 57mm turbos, but it works good. Super small turbos. NT 98mm turbo, small block boost class, LS7 heads or cathedral. Good. I don't know what size the motor is. So if it's a big motor, then I would go with an LS7 head. If not, with a good cathedral port head, you could get everything out of a 98mm turbo. Thousand horsepower common block, 4.4 liter V8. Anybody know a good machine shop that can tie 2 2.2s together? If you were going to do that, you would do what the guy's doing with the Hondas, because they have such better cylinder heads and blocks and cranks. and valve train. I've not done a Buick Grand National Turbo V6, if that's what you're talking about. I did some intake testing. Take a look at the 464 valve intake video that's up. You see a bunch of different intakes on there. I've never seen the Civic with a Corvette engine in it. What I wanted to do is do a front drive one from you know, like an LS4 or whatever, the front drive applications. I wanted to put that in a Civic. I thought that would be cool. Compound is better because of lower back pressure in EGTs. Who is saying that? Jeff, I saw that. I saw the information that you sent over. 712 wheel horsepower. That's pretty sporty. Ooh, a Triumph Spitfire. I do like those. The only thing I like more than a Spitfire is a bug-eyed Sprite. 66 millimeter bore warmer make 500 horsepower. Yes, it would. The truck intake is fine. You don't, if you already have the 66, you can use that. Otherwise, there are lots of other good turbos you can use. The 76 millimeter from CX would easily do 500. The GT45 on a 5.3 works good there, and you can make a lot more than 500 if you want to do that. Yeah, if somebody's looking for a good intake for their 464 valve, I have that. I have that FR500 that I'm selling. How far can a 6-liter be bored? I've heard people taking them out to LS3 size, so a 4065, but I don't like going that far. We go 30 over on most of our stuff. An early GMC V6, the big ones, yep. Yeah, that's what we were thinking, James, is that trans is just not caravans with the 2. What the heck is going on? Everybody got lost again. I'm back. Groove, what was your question? Cam specs for a max bar 8,500 RPM 98 millimeter LS 403. That's out of my wheelhouse. The stuff that I do is not that. Because I would imagine that motor is going to have a lot of other stuff on it. The FR500 intake was 2,500 is what it was up for sale for. A lot of people are making comments about that L67. Actually, mine was an L32 about making that power. Like when we did the compound stuff on it, they're like, yeah, all that's well and good, but the transmission in a GTP or those kinds of things are not going to stand up to that. They're probably right. But what about if you did it as a rear drive thing and did the transmission that's in the Camaro? That might work. Jose, we run 2 45 millimeter wastegates, but you could probably get away with one. You could certainly get away with 1 60 millimeter, depending on how big that is and if you want to fit it. The new Turbo Smart stuff is actually fairly small and fits in a lot of places. Jeff, yeah, the lift might not change the boost that much, but did you change the pulleys also? I don't have the Sullivan intake anymore. Can a Gen 3.5, 5.3 be bored 30 over? Yes, an iron one certainly can. You can go way more than that. You can go out to 3905 on those. LS4 King goes through the 4T80E swap. Yeah, I like his stuff. That's Brandon, right? He sent me a couple of the superchargers. Oh, Sunbeam Tiger. I didn't measure the bolt stretch because I had sent the whole motor, the rods, and everything out to the machine shop. Oh, so if you change the pulleys and you went to a smaller pulley, then you change the boost. 4.6, you can go 30 over the 2 valve and an iron block. Okay, let me know on the FR500. I think it has a throttle body on it, has an EGR and stuff on it. I'm listening but distracted by projects. Check breakaway torque on the rods. Is that what you're talking about? We already pulled the rods off of the motor, I think. Any trick to getting a small radiator to cool a large engine? Yeah, lots of vehicle speed. No, we're not fixing the 3800. That thing's, the short block's getting thrown away. For some reason, I thought we were talking about the 2.2. No, the 3800 is, where the heck is that? That one did not get picked up. That one's, I think, still at West Tech. How interchangeable are the LS3 and LS7 bottom end parts? The LS7, no. I mean, you could put the crank in, but it's a different snout length. The LS3 crank was going to be the same as your LQ4 crank. It's the same stroke. You can interchange those without any problem. The rods are the same length. The piston obviously is a different bore size on both of those. 2 more minutes. Ball bearing versus journal bearing turbos. People talk about boost response with that, but I'm not convinced. Jonathan, tell me what kind of power you want to make. I would do an S475 on a 408 with the T6 version that most people sell. Would be good for that. You could make 1,000 horsepower with it, and it would be good for that size displacement. Ooh, Vermilion Fire sunroof Falcon. MGGT, nice. I do like the way Panteras look. I especially like them in the GT5 guys. I'm on a budget. How many pounds can I run? Just start off low. Start off at 5 or 6 pounds and see what happens. So, Rocket, you think that there is a response rate change from a ball bearing turbo? You think that it's a frictional change that changes spool rate? An S475 is going to be smaller than a PT88. So, Dan, you're just thinking it would be better to have a compound. That way we could run 2 intercoolers effectively? I like all the stuff Calvin does. It's awesome. I wouldn't de-stroke a 6-liter because it makes more power as a 6-liter, but it worked good. It made good power. I can tell you that if I do a video on a de-stroke motor, it will get 1 million more views than if I do a 6-liter because people want the de-stroke thing, even though it doesn't make as much power. It'll get the intake temperature down, but the pressure is going to be so much higher on a compound setup. I haven't run and this will be the last question because I got to get going. I haven't run the Edelbrock small bore stuff. I've only run the trick flow stuff on the 305, and those obviously work good. We didn't build the 305 big enough or powerful enough to take advantage of everything that head had to offer. And I'd kind of like to do a ported version of that 175 head for the small block for the 305 because that's good stuff. Thank you guys all for watching. Make sure to check out the video. I'll have more turbo stuff up tomorrow, and then who knows after that. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you all tomorrow.